Good afternoon, Mr. Dombrovskis.
Good afternoon.
What is your main message that you're bringing to Croatia? How big are the risks that Croatian economy is facing, and is the Croatian government on the right track with its reforms?
Well, first of all, I would like to emphasize that this visit is taking place in a context of European semester, and the intention is that myself and my fellow members of the Commission would visit all EU member states to discuss their economic challenges, also fiscal issues, and not only with governments, but also to discuss with parliaments and social partners in the member states. So far I had been traveling member states from Germany to Malta, and so now I'm making a visit to Croatia, also in a context of European semester. Then to come specifically to the economic and fiscal challenges in Croatia, of course we know that there is lots to do. Croatia is in excessive deficit procedure. Our forecast for this year's budget deficit is 5.6%, and under no policy change assumption, deficit would be 5.7% next year. So certainly there is a need to step up fiscal effort in order to bring public finances back on a sustainable path. And also Croatia is experiencing excessive macroeconomic imbalances. Therefore, there are a number of country-specific recommendations in order to address those macroeconomic imbalances.
But we've seen that you said in your report that Croatian government national reform program is ambitious enough, but yet we've seen in the document explicitly saying that level of ambition has been below expectations in a number of areas. So would you say Croatian government is doing enough and ambitious enough?
Well, to be very clear on this, when we came with our February package, including country reports and assessment of member states' economic imbalances, Croatia was one of the several member states with excessive macroeconomic imbalances, and Commission's decision was to come to reassessment of the structural reform effort of the two countries, of France and Croatia, already in May. And Commission's conclusion was that national reform program, in this case prepared by Croatia, is ambitious enough to avoid stepping up of excessive deficit procedure. But that said, there are still plenty of macroeconomic challenges to be addressed, and more needs to be done in this regard.
There are reports just these days in German media saying that the Commission has warned Croatia about the lack of reforms and dire economic situations, and that you come to teach Croatian government a lesson. Are you?
Well, first of all, I really cannot, follow all different interpretations, but certainly I do not agree with this interpretation, because as I said, we are visiting and intend to visit all EU member states and to discuss macroeconomic challenges. And by no means we are going to member states to teach them a lesson. So I also hope for a very open, very constructive dialogue with Croatian authorities and also with social partners.
But we've seen also in the Commission analysis that last year's country-specific recommendations for Croatia were not implemented. 5 out of 8 had limited progress, and only 1 was successfully, completely implemented. Is this a good score for a government?
Well, certainly as regards implementation of country-specific recommendations, we see that there has been limited progress overall in Croatia. So, and therefore we actually have to reiterate some of the country-specific recommendations also this year. But it must be said that if we look also at the overall picture, the implementation rate of country-specific recommendations is relatively low. As regards 2014 recommendations, overall in EU, just over half of the recommendations, 55%, there is at least some progress. which means that we certainly can do better. And now also in this European semester we are working on ways how to improve implementation rate, including in Croatia.
But Croatia's score from the last year's country-specific recommendation, would you say that Croatian government could have done more?
Well, Croatian and not only Croatian government could have done more. As I said, it's important to put it in overall picture where we see that implementation rate of country-specific recommendations generally is relatively low. And Croatia's implementation rate is even below EU average. So there is a potential for actually improving this work. Also, we believe this is very much needed for Croatia's economy, because we see that economic recovery is very slow. Croatia's economic growth rates are well below EU average. Budget deficits, as I said, are still quite high. Public debt is growing. So those are challenges which need to be addressed, and I think it's also in Croatia's best interest to put its economy back on sustainable growth and job creation path.
What you precisely said, these are all challenges that also Greece is facing. 6th year in the recession, same as Croatia, growing public debt, no recovery or very small recovery. That's why some media, German media, for example, compare Greece to Croatia by saying both countries face a threat of state bankruptcy. Do you think this comparison is correct?
Well, once again, I would not draw that kind of parallels, because first and foremost, Croatia is financing its debt from the markets. It's not in international bailout program like Greece or also Cyprus for that sake. Croatia's public debt is growing, and that's a concern, but still it's almost 2 times lower than in Greece. And also if we look at the structural challenges in economy of Greece and Croatia, those structural challenges are quite different. So I wouldn't go for those oversimplified solutions, but once again, there's also no place for complacency. There are serious issues both on fiscal and macroeconomic side which need to be addressed, and that's exactly what I'm going to discuss tomorrow with Croatian authorities.
One of the recommendations issued just 2 weeks ago is that Croatia should introduce property tax. This is something that the Croatian government is publicly saying that it doesn't intend to do. Does this concern you? I mean, it looks like the first country-specific recommendation for Croatia for this year will be broken already.
Well, first of all, it's a second recommendation, but that's not the point here. But as regards property tax, indeed, there has been also some preparation work done in Croatia in order to work towards property tax, including setting in order, cadastral registers and so on, which is, of course, needed also to have much more effective system of managing property rights of real estate in general. But this recommendation goes in line with European Commission's general approach, where we are recommending to the member states to shift tax burden away from labor, especially low-paid labor, to other tax bases which are less detrimental to growth, like consumption, like property, like capital. In case of Croatia, the first, so to say, way of shifting the tax burden, we really see it towards property, because there is no property tax as it's in almost all other EU member states.
But what will happen, in your view, if the government and the country declines to listen to this recommendation?
Well, first of all, I would like to hear from Croatian authorities before engaging in further comments. So tomorrow I have this opportunity to discuss with Croatian authorities, and then I would be able to provide further comments.
One more thing about enlargement and new member states. It seemed like in the past, new member states of EU experienced growth and investments, and it was good for business when they joined the EU. But this seems not to be working anymore, at least not in the case of Croatia.
Well, there are two significant differences. One, for example, on 2004 enlargement, when 10 new member states joined the EU, it was happening basically during the time when global economy was booming, when European economy was booming, and actually it was much easier to attract foreign investments than it's now. Now we are in aftermath of a serious financial and economical crisis. We are facing a risk of very slow recovery, very slow jobs creation. What we are seeing specifically in Europe, that investment levels, which fell during the crisis, have not really recovered. That's why European Commission is coming with special programs actually to stimulate investment, like this well-known Juncker investment plan or 315 billion euros package. And actually just today the agreement on the regulation for European Fund for strategic investments associated with this Juncker investment plan was reached, which is positive news. It means that this Juncker plan is on track. But it means that generally now it's more difficult to attract investment, and it goes not only for new member states in the EU, but for EU in general. But second is more Croatia-specific issue, that if we look at the business environment indicators, we see that there are many issues with the business environment, quasi-fiscal charges, predictability of the environment, fragmentation of different levels of authorities, and correspondingly requirements which are put forward to businesses. So that's one of our recommendations actually for Croatia to work very seriously towards improving its business environment, because this is going to be important element for Croatia to step up the levels of foreign direct investment.
Before joining the European Commission, you served as a Prime Minister of Latvia, and your term in office is perceived as a successful implementation of austerity policy. You cut government expenditure, and you brought the country very quickly to recovery and high rates of growth. Are there any lessons from Latvia that Croatia could implement?
Well, I always say on this that there is no one-size-fits-all solutions, and you need to look at the specific challenges in different member states. But one lesson which I think we can draw from this Latvia's experience, that if there is a need of adjustment, then it's better actually to act quickly, to restore, to do the necessary adjustment, to restore financial stability, and with the financial stability to return to the economic growth. And that's exactly what we did in Latvia. We did a bulk of the adjustment already during the crisis, especially in 2009. And as a result, we were able to restore financial stability, and already in the second half of 2010 we were back to economic growth, and for several years we were actually the fastest growing EU economy.
Analysts say that Croatia is suffering from a big government or a big public expenditure. Would you suggest, based on Latvian lessons, any big cuts in that direction?
Well, as I said, I would be very cautious in advocating one-size-fits-all solutions, and also it's worth noting that in 2008-2009 it was a global financial crisis. Latvia was facing also acute financial crisis. We were cut off the financial market, so the situation was entirely different than it's in Croatia right now. Right now there is plenty of liquidity which is available. available. Countries can finance themselves with low interest rates, so it's entirely different situation. But in any case, it's clear if Croatia has a budget deficit of 5.6% of GDP, there is lots of work to be done to bring it down first below 3% of GDP, which is the Stability and Growth Pact criteria. And on this, Commission thinks that it should be mainly oriented towards expenditure reduction and not so much towards revenue side.
But Croatia is on a path to miss the deadline for deficit reduction, deadline set by the Commission and the Council. Is there any concern on your side that deadline would not be respected?
Well, certainly there are concerns if we see 5.6% of GDP budget deficit this year, and as I said, under no policy change assumption, budget deficit will be 5.7% of GDP next year. So this is one of the points which I'm going to discuss with Croatian government tomorrow.
Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, very good.